Let's dive in. Today, we're going to build your very first mental map of the Linux operating system. Now, if you're a student, or really just anyone curious about what's actually under the hood of modern computing, you are in the perfect place. By the time we're done here, you're going to have a solid grasp of the core concepts that make Linux so incredibly powerful.
Have you ever wondered what's behind the curtain? What's powering so much of our digital world? I'm talking about the servers, the supercomputers, the systems where the pros do their work. Well, more often than not, they turn to Linux for its raw power and flexibility. So let's peel back those layers and see what really makes it tick. Our goal today is pretty straightforward. We're going to build a solid mental model of Linux. Think of it like getting the layout of a brand new city. By the end of this, you'll have a map in your head that shows you where all the important stuff is and, crucially, how all the different parts connect to each other. So where do we start on this map? Well, we start at the absolute center, the heart of this entire city. We're talking about something called the kernel. It's the core, the beating heart of the entire operating system.
Okay, so what does the kernel actually do? Well, think of it as the master manager. It's the big boss in charge of all the computer's physical hardware. We're talking the processor, the memory, the storage drives. Every single piece of hardware ultimately reports to the kernel.
Probably the best way to think about the kernel is as a bridge. See, your software, like your web browser or a game, can't just talk directly to your physical hardware. It doesn't speak the same language. The kernel acts as the ultimate interpreter, translating what the software wants into instructions that the hardware can actually understand and carry out.
Okay, let's move on to our next major landmark and see how this all builds out, the file system. Now, this is where Linux starts to feel really different from other operating systems you might have used. And honestly, it's one of its most clever features.
So here's where things really take a sharp turn from what you might be used to. If you've ever used Windows, you know the drill, right? You've got your C drive, your D drive, maybe a USB drive shows up as E. Well, Linux just tosses that whole idea out the window. Instead, everything, and I mean everything, exists inside one single unified tree.
Every file, every program, every single device exists somewhere inside this one big tree. In the very, very top of that tree, its single starting point is called the root, and it's just represented by a simple /. That's it. Everything branches out from there.
So, if everything starts at the root, what are the main branches? Let's take a quick tour of some of the most important directories. You can think of these as the key neighborhoods on our map.
First up are the places you'll probably spend the most time. The home directory, that's your personal space. It's like your apartment. Each user gets their own folder inside, maybe something like home/John. And then you have /bin. Think of /bin as your toolbox. It holds all the basic essential commands you'll use every day, like ls to list files or cp to copy them.
All right, now for what I like to call the system's engine room. The etc directory is where all the system-wide configuration files live. The boot folder, that has all the critical files the computer needs just to start up, including the kernel itself. And lib, that's where you find essential libraries, which are basically shared pieces of code that lots of different programs need to run.
Next up are the folders that are always changing. The dev directory is super interesting because in Linux, everything is treated like a file, even your hardware. So your main hard drive might just show up as a file called /dev/sda. And what's so cool about that? It means you can interact with your hardware using the same simple tools you use for regular files. It's an incredibly elegant idea. Then you've got var, which holds variable data, like the system log files that are constantly growing. Okay, now that we have our map, let's talk about who gets to go where. A really crucial concept in Linux is permissions, specifically the big difference between a regular user and the all-powerful administrator. This separation of power is a huge security feature. As a standard user, you live in your /home directory and use the common commands from /bin. But there's a special administrator user called root who has its own private home in /root and gets access to super powerful system commands in /sbin. We're talking tools that can reformat entire drives or reboot the whole system.
We've mapped out the core of Linux, but there is one last piece to this puzzle. You've probably heard names like Ubuntu, or Mint, or Fedora. These are all different flavors, or as they're called, distributions of Linux.
So a Linux distribution, or distro for short, is basically the whole package. It takes that Linux kernel we talked about, the engine, and bundles it with all the other software you need, like a desktop environment, applications, system tools, the whole shebang, to create a complete, usable operating system.
And that, of course, brings up a really common question.
Why are there so many? Why not just have one single Linux? Well, the answer really comes down to choice and purpose.
See, it all just boils down to this. Different people have different needs. A researcher might need every last drop of performance for heavy computing. A developer needs all their coding tools ready to go from the start. Someone else might just want a really simple, lightweight system to bring an old computer back to life. While a company running a server needs rock-solid security above all else. There's a distro out there that's been tailored for almost any job you can think of.
So there you have it. We've built our mental model. You know that the kernel is the core, the file system is one giant tree, and the distributions are just different packages built for different people. You have the mat. The only question left is, which world will you explore first?